For decades, the United States military operated as an outward-facing force. Its primary mission was power projection, fighting wars and maintaining stability thousands of miles away, while assuming the homeland remained a sanctuary. But the rise of cheap, mass-produced unmanned aircraft has neutralized that traditional geographic advantage. These systems allow adversaries to bridge the distance and bring the threat directly to American soil. These are no longer just hobbyist toys or battlefield nuisances. In the hands of a foreign power, they represent a low-cost method for targeting military bases, airports, and power grids within the United States. This vulnerability has created a massive vacuum in domestic defense, forcing a military designed for global offense to pivot toward protecting its own backyard. We saw the severity of this threat last week at Germany's Leipzig airport. Armed drones forced a total suspension of flights and eventually collided with a cargo plane midair, turning a security incident into an air safety crisis. To close this gap, the Pentagon is rushing experimental hardware to domestic facilities. This includes high-powered lasers and microwave systems, capable of downing drones without using traditional ammunition. But firing high-energy military weapons into the same skies occupied by passenger jets introduces a new set of risks. A system designed for a desert battlefield behaves very differently in the crowded airspace of a major city. Attempting to solve a modern asymmetrical threat with experimental directed energy weapons has created a logistical and safety paradox that the government is currently unprepared to manage. This deployment triggers a clash of mandates. The FAA controls the skies for passenger safety, while the military neutralizes threats. Overlapping these authorities creates communication blind spots. In a fast-moving emergency, there is no clear protocol for who controls the airspace. Earlier this year in El Paso, Customs and Border Protection activated a military-loaned counter-drone laser. However, they failed to properly notify the aviation authorities managing the surrounding civilian traffic. Detecting a potential hazard to aircraft, the FAA grounded all traffic and closed the airspace for hours while investigating the source of the interference. The uncoordinated attempt to defend the airport paralyzed the very infrastructure it was intended to protect. Weeks later, the friction turned into hardware loss. Defense Department personnel across the Texas border fired a high-energy laser and successfully downed a drone, only to discover they accidentally targeted a surveillance craft operated by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. This friendly fire incident illustrates a gap between the rapid deployment of hardware and the interagency coordination required to use it without hitting American assets. While Washington struggles with these internal hurdles, foreign adversaries are moving on a much faster timeline, having already integrated these technologies into their standard doctrines. Iran, for example, has built a massive domestic industry for drones and ballistic missiles. Despite sanctions, they claim to be manufacturing these weapons faster than they are used, specifically designed for offensive operations far from their own borders. The U.S. is now caught between the rapid innovation of adversaries abroad and the slow-moving bureaucratic gridlock of its own domestic agencies. Foreign adversaries are watching these airspace shutdowns and friendly fire incidents. They recognize that America's greatest vulnerability isn't a lack of weapons, but a lack of a unified system to manage them at home. For years, the assumption of absolute dominance in offensive warfare created a blind spot. The U.S. perfected the art of attacking distant targets, but it neglected the localized frameworks needed for domestic defense. This has created an unsustainable economic ratio. The military often relies on multi-million-dollar interceptors and complex protocols to counter drones that cost less than a laptop. While the military can easily project violence outward, it currently lacks the agility to absorb and counter cheap, asymmetrical threats without disrupting its own society. To address this, the Pentagon, the DHS, and the FAA are currently drafting a new interagency agreement. This is a forced scramble to rewrite the rules for when and how the military can engage threats over domestic soil. The challenge is technical as much as it is legal. These agencies must find a way to disable an enemy drone without inadvertently blinding a commercial pilot or causing a passenger jet to lose its navigation systems. This problem will only intensify as drone technology becomes cheaper and more accessible to both foreign adversaries and domestic actors. The traditional safety of American domestic airspace is being rewritten by the reality of low-cost warfare. Success now requires more than just building a better laser. It requires learning how to fire it without disabling the very systems the military is trying to defend.